Hey everyone, Simon here with Top Tips Training, and in this video we're going to break down and analyze Roger Federer's game. So we're going to take a closer look at each element of his game. We're going to study and analyze exactly what he does, what makes that stroke or that part of his game so good, and what we can copy and utilize in our own game. So let's look at the serve to begin. Now this is the foundation of Federer's entire game. Federer manages to hold his service games 88.8% of the time. Now this is slightly ahead of Pete Sampras, who many consider to be the greatest server in the history of the sport. Sampras held serve 88.7% of the time, so Federer is slightly ahead. Federer is right at the top in terms of holding his service games. There are only a couple of players ahead of him, and this includes players like John Isner and Ivo Karlovic and a few other giants. He's won 56.8% of all points that he plays on his second serve. So what makes Federer's serve so good, and what can we copy and actually use in our own game? So there's two main things that stand out between Federer and most other players. The first one is his accuracy, so his ability to hit different spots within the service boxes, but also his disguise, his ability to hide where he's going and make his serve really unreadable. So the foundation of Federer's serve is he uses a platform stance. Now the platform stance is used by players like Djokovic, Pete Sampras and Dominic Thiem. So they keep their feet around shoulder width apart all the way through their motion. So Federer starts off on his front foot like so, and from this position Federer's main source of power comes from that leg drive, that explosive down and up action. And this is something that we can all try to copy and try to use on our own serve, to have an explosive leg drive regardless of the stance. You could be someone who uses that platform stance, or you can use the pinpoint stance. Either way, you want to feel that you're going down and up as explosively as possible. Now a common error that a lot of players will do on their serve, regardless of stance, is they'll use mainly their front leg for that leg drive. Whereas with Federer, you can see that he uses both legs equally as well. So he's pushing off his left leg, he's pushing off his front leg, but he's also using his back leg to explode up. So he isn't doing a common error, which is going on that front leg too early, which then makes this back leg almost die. It's not really doing his job. Whereas with Federer, you'll see him going into that knee bend, he'll have his body weight on both legs, and he's driving with both legs. Now if you're playing Federer, or you're returning his serve, you would see his back facing towards you. Now many players, they'll serve front on or side on. You'll see the left shoulder if they're a right-handed player when they're going into that knee bend, into that power position. So you would see their body slightly changing depending on the serve they're going to hit. So being a returner, if I'm facing Federer, I would see his back instead of the left side of his body. Now from this position, Federer can disguise his serve very well. If he wants to go out wide on the outside, he can stay side on for longer. If he wants to hit a kick serve, he can do the exact same motion and just stay side on all the way through that contact point. Now if he wants to go down the tee, he can then open up his shoulders a little bit earlier so that uncoiling motion will happen quicker. And if he wants to hit a serve into the player's body, he can do the same motion all the way through and just change the angle of the strings and change the spin that he uses. But his motion always stays the same. So as a returner, it becomes almost impossible to read where Federer is serving because his motion always stays the same. So he's always keeping his ball toss and his service motion the same, which makes it very unreadable. So those elements we can all try to copy on our own serve. We can try to make our serve unreadable by keeping the ball toss in a similar zone, or using the same ball toss for each serve and being able to adapt just with our racket and the angle of the strings. And we can try to use our legs to really explode up into that ball, so that down and up, that loading and unloading, and if we can really use both legs equally as well to explode up into the ball, then we'll be maximizing the power from the leg drive. Now let's break down and analyze the Federer forehand. So many people would say that Federer has the greatest forehand of all time. Technically, it's perfect, and there are a few things that we can all copy from Federer's forehand, and we'll get into that in just a second. But let's firstly look at some of the stats. So Federer hits around 73% of all his winners from the baseline with his forehand. Now the variety on Federer's forehand is what sets his forehand apart from many other players. He can hit with aggressive topspin, but he can also flatten out that forehand when he wants to. Now his spin rate is very high when he goes for that heavy topspin shot. He can hit with 4,500 RPM on the ball, so revolutions per minute on that tennis ball. But he can also go down all the way to 1,000 only when he wants to hit that flatter shot. So his range goes from 1,000 RPM up to 4,500 RPM. So this variety will make him be able to do everything that he wants to with that forehand. When he wants to hit a short angle, he can increase the RPM and hit that heavier topspin shot to take the player off the court. When he wants to hit that flatter down the line shot, or the flatter inside out forehand shot, where he can start to dictate play or hit the winner, he can do so. Now Federer uses a Eastern forehand grip. It's a grip that not many pros will use. Most pros will use the semi-Western. So the Eastern forehand grip is, if you took your hand and you placed it on your strings like so, and you slide the hand down now until you reach the bottom of the grip, the index knuckle would be on bevel free. So the palm of the hand is very open towards that contact point when you make contact with that Eastern forehand grip. Now I also use the Eastern forehand grip, and I've tried the semi-Western, I've played with the Western, and I can say that the Eastern allows for that variation, because when you want more spin, you can produce it using a slightly different racket angle, and when you want to flatten it out, you can also hit through that ball much more. But for most players, they'll use that semi-Western because this will allow that spin to be produced in an easier way. Now Federer really engages his core muscles extremely well during his forehand. So at the start of his forehand, his racket head is higher than the grip level, which is creating that leverage right from the beginning of the stroke. So as soon as Federer recognizes that he can hit his forehand, his first step is coiling the upper body. Storing energy in the trunk muscles and then helping him also to prepare that racket. From this position, if Federer does nothing with his hands but simply coils, he's already got the racket back more than 50% of the way. So from this position, he's coiling the upper body. This is storing that energy, especially in those oblique muscles, the side abdominal muscles, and then as he uncoils, he'll be producing a lot of that rotational power throughout that contact point. So he's storing the energy and he's keeping the racket head higher than the grip level. Now once he gets into that kind of power position, he'll start to drop the racket head. So he has the non-hitting hand across the body, he has the racket head higher than the grip, which gives him that space to accelerate. From that position, he'll now start to close the strings. So the side of the strings he's going to make contact with will be facing the ground. Now this is very important in the Federer forehand because this is what allows him to have that 4,500 RPM on the ball when he wants to. Because he's closing the strings, his racket angle now prior to contact is very closed, and as he brushes the ball, he can then produce that heavy, aggressive topspin. Now, if Federer was to drop the racket like so, he'd be able to produce a very flat shot, but spin would be a real issue because of his grip. But by closing the strings, now he's able to produce that heavy spin. He'll then be able to brush over the top of the ball very quickly with that windshield wiper motion, producing that aggressive spin. But when he wants to flatten out his forehand from this position, what he'll do is he'll start that racket lag phase, and the side of the strings he's going to hit the ball with would then be facing the right side of the court. So it'd be this position and this position. Now from here, he'll make contact and keep his strings slightly longer towards that target, and then he'll use the windshield wiper motion to finish the forehand. So he's manipulating the angle of the strings prior to and during that contact zone. This allows him to produce that heavy spin or to produce that flatter shot when he needs to. Now Federer also has great racket lag prior to contact, and he has that extended arm that allows him to make contact way out in front of his body. So let's go over that racket lag first. So from this position, what happens is Federer starts to uncoil the body, the shoulders start to open up, he started to drive into the shot with his legs, so he's using that ground force, and this allows this racket now to lag behind the grip and the hand. So the racket head is lagging behind in this position. And this is achieved from being relaxed, from being loose, and from using the kinetic chain in the right way. Now Federer uses the extended arm forehand, which means his arm is fully extended or close to full extension when he's making contact. So he's making contact way out in front of his body, and he's keeping his head still on that point of contact. So he's really tracking the ball well until he makes contact with that ball. From this position, Federer will use a variety of finishes, but his main one is the across the chest finish. So he's making contact, he starts to close the racket face, he starts to come on top of the ball with that windshield wiper motion, and then the racket will finish across his chest, and he's almost pulling in the racket using the right bicep muscle. So relax, 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 and then finishing across the chest. So what can we copy from the Federer forehand? The first thing is that coil with the upper body. So as early as possible, as soon as you recognize you can hit your forehand, try to get this left shoulder, if you're a right-handed player, coiling up. From this position, I'm simply turning my shoulders, and you can see what's happening with my racket head. I'm going from this front-on position to a side-on position. Front-on, side-on. So by doing this coil, I've already got my racket half of the way through that whole preparation phase. From here now, I can just let go with this non-hitting hand. My racket gets into the power position, and I'm already set to hit that shot. The other thing we can work on is achieving that racket lag. So trying to get the bottom of the racket pointing towards the ball prior to actually making contact. This will give us more power and more control over that shot. In part 2 of this lesson, we'll break down the Federer backhand, his footwork, and the way he wins points. This is a lesson that you don't want to miss out on. So part 2 will be available to our email subscribers. So if you already receive our emails, you'll be getting the lesson very shortly. If you're not an email subscriber, but you want to watch part 2, then simply click on the link below this video and sign up for a free serve guide. That will ensure that you get our future emails. All the best, and see you soon. Now, something that makes Federer's backhand quite unique and different to many other pros is his flexibility on that follow through. So as he makes contact, he'll change the way he actually finishes the shot. Now Federer's slice can produce 5,300 RPM on the ball. This is more than Nadal's forehand. His footwork is the glue that gels his entire game together. It's what allows him to defend, to actually have that chance to then attack. And there are three main steps that we can all learn from when it comes to Federer's footwork.